I'll tell you when here. All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Let me do a quick Twitter check, of course. Still getting used to this. All right, welcome, everybody. I am Hunter, aka Huntman10 on Twitter. I'm joined tonight by Drew, also known as Detroit Dave 7 on Twitter. Really happy to have him as a guest tonight. He is a co-host on the Approach podcast. Him and Rob. I don't have his at name in front of me right now, but him and Rob, a lot of you guys know Rob. They have that weekly show on Mondays where they break down just the tournament in general, but also from a PGA standpoint. And I've really grown to like the show a lot because you guys talk about something that not a lot of shows talk about. I think a majority of shows talk about our tournaments. Even the DFS shows talk about the tournaments more from who's going to win, who's the best plays, who ranks out from in a model perspective. But I really like yours and Rob's show a lot because you guys, talk a lot about game theory. So, like I said, wanted to introduce you a little bit, but would you like to plug your show a little bit and just kind of talk about what you guys talk about just on a weekly basis?
Yeah, well, Hunter, appreciate you having me on, man. It'll be fun. And thanks for the kind words. I have a lot of fun with the show on Mondays, the Approach podcast with Rob. As you know, Rob, he's fantastic with kind of his process, and I think that's on Mondays a lot of the times. It's not necessarily always giving you tons of players, which will give you some players, of course, but it's making sure the process is correct. And if we're doing things right on a week-to-week basis and kind of thinking differently than anybody else or other people, it just gives us that value on a week-to-week basis. And so we try to, mold in, game theory as far as strategy. And then, Monday's a little early, but, projections really determine a lot of what we do and how we differentiate ourselves from different lineups. And so that's extremely important. But if you're doing the process correctly, it's something that can carry over to a week-to-week basis. So just trying to give kind of thinking points more than just saying, hey, this is the tournament we have. Of course, we'll break down the course and whatnot, but just trying to get people to try to think maybe a little different way to try to gain somewhat of an advantage on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great answer. And that's why I like your show a lot too. I will never consider myself an expert from kind of the golf knowledge perspective. I'm still kind of new to the game on that part. But I do, I've learned a lot from you and Rob, especially just, how to play this game more from a DFS perspective. I stopped listening to shows that didn't even bring up the word ownership in it because if you're not, considering ownership, when you're making your lineups, you're, very likely that you're not going to have success, especially the top success that we're all shooting for. So, like I said, just want to do a quick plug for your podcast there. I really
appreciate
enjoy listening to that. So,
yeah, absolutely. And to the ownership thing, it's what happens a lot. And I think people have a tendency to do, say you're not as familiar from a week-to-week basis on every week. You're just kind of a guy that likes to play DFS. What we find is a lot of people just click on either names they're comfortable with, names they know, and that's why you see ownership for a certain group of players be one way, or you see players that have a bad week and people just run away and get off of them. Well, just because he didn't have that week, that doesn't mean that he wasn't the right guy to pick. And it doesn't mean that you need to jump off of him the following week. You got to trust kind of your process. And you'll see it all the time. Like you see it on Twitter, I'm blacklisting this guy, he screwed me this week. Well, a lot of the times people get off of that guy and ownership projections show you that much. And then the following week is kind of was his week. Just because you were a week early doesn't mean your process wasn't right. It just means sometimes it just doesn't work out like that. We're not going to always hit perfect, every single week. And so that's kind of the perspective to look at it from. And I do think that like household names, people you're comfortable with, when the people that aren't diving as deep into it as we are and whatnot are playing DFS, kind of lean towards those players and the projections show it. And sometimes it works out for them and sometimes it doesn't. But to gain that a little bit of an advantage, I think is important, especially when we're talking about trying to build that lineup that hopefully someday makes us rich and we don't have to work as hard.
100%. Yeah. No, I was just talking to you about my setup and how I'm trying to get a better computer and set up here. I'd love to win a big tournament someday. And that'd be my
Yeah,
first
make it a
purchase.
little easier, man, for sure.
Exactly. No, so kind of going into what you said there, I think one of the toughest parts, really PGA DFS, but all of DFS in general, is when you're so high on a guy, you have him in so many of your lineups, and he just doesn't, exceed your expectations, or he misses the cut, for example. And one of the toughest things, like you said, is going back to that guy the next week. But what I've learned is most times if you like one guy one week, there's a good chance that he'll probably come back that next week and he just had an off week, the one time that you really liked him. So I love what you said there. I think it's, like I said, one of the tougher parts, but once you actually do it, you go back to that same guy and it actually pays off for you, you realize and you reap the benefits of that low ownership. So
It's a good feeling.
yeah, well
For
said.
sure. For sure.
So like I said, kind of gets me into this weekend, and what we've been seeing over the fall swing, in my opinion, has been really, I think you guys said it on your show, really condensed ownership, where it's a handful of guys, 10 to 20 that every show is talking about. And I mean, we saw Sung Kang last week at about 24%, and I could not believe it. But that's, again, what we've been seeing during this fall swing. It's the guys that have been talked about a lot, guys that we're familiar with. And you can really get a lot of leverage, like you said, by just maybe fading those guys, especially the Sung Kang type of guys. So I
Right.
was talking to you before the show how I want to kind of do these moving forward. I want to have 5 or so main questions that either relate to who's going to win the golf tournament, or 5 questions, or some of them can relate to just DFS in general and how that will impact this weekend too. So my first question is how the weather will impact this weekend's tournament. And that's not really one that I always consider because, it's something that you just kind of look at the Wednesday night before. But,
Yeah.
this tournament is, known for its wind. I think the Pro-Am today was canceled due to, high winds, rainy conditions. And I think there might even
Dangerous
be a little bit.
conditions.
What did you say? What was
It
that?
said dangerous conditions is the reason they
Danger, yeah.
canceled it today. So that kind of shows you. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it's not a weekly thing where we look at this. And one of the important things of checking weather, especially with seaside golf courses, if there's any advantage you can gain based off of tee time draw, right? If the weather's going to be better in the morning and then better in the late afternoon on Friday, guys have a significant advantage when we talk about the weather. This golf course in particular, the weather is really its own defense. I mean, the golf course is 6,800 yards to par 71. So without without the wind and those conditions, it's essentially a pitch and putt for guys of this caliber. Kind of the one best ways to explain it is when Brendan Todd won in 2019, he shot 24 under. There was not very much wind. It was rather down, right? And then last year when Brian Gay won, it was at 15 under? Yeah,
Yep.
15 under. So it was a 9-shot difference. And that right there just shows the difference that the wind's going to make this week. And it's super important to pay attention to the weather. When we're looking at it, of course, when we get to Saturday, Sunday, that's irrelevant. But if you can find any edge or advantage in these first 2 days, now this week it's kind of hard because Friday looks relatively benign as far as conditions go for pretty much the whole day. And when we talk about getting into tomorrow, it's supposed to be a steady 20, 25, 30 mile an hour wind from pretty much from the peg in the ground in the morning. So it's hard to determine an advantage tomorrow because I'm not sure there will be one. Maybe the afternoon wave may have a little bit more of an advantage. The wind's supposed to kick down maybe 5 mile an hour or so. But yeah, to your point, this golf course without wind is it's we've seen on this fall swing, it's been a bunch of birdie fest, right? Outside of Zozo, we've seen just 20 plus under par winning every week. And so what this course lacks in distance, it gains with the the wind and that factoring in. So there's a reason that the past 2 winners are guys that haven't necessarily aren't guys that are going to bomb it, and they control their golf ball. They're also wonderful ball strikers. I think there's certainly an advantage to hitting the ball pure. The wind has a tendency to not affect golf shots as much when the ball struck well, so it kind of gives an advantage to the guys that are really good ball strikers and iron players. But Yeah, the wind's everything this week, man. It really is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we got Phil in the chat here. He says the wind in Bermuda is sneaky. It can change at a moment's notice. And I agree with that. It's, thinking about it from a DFS perspective, do you like to stack you said you play about 20 lineups. Do you, even consider stacking, even if you're not like if win doesn't really matter, do you stack any lineups even on a just a normal basis, or do you not consider that at all, or what's your process, I guess, when it comes to stacking?
Yeah, so typically, and this is not, of course, always, but typically, it's more benign conditions in the morning. One, the greens are nobody's been on the greens. The greens are rolling as pure as they're going to roll all day. The afternoon wave has groups that have gone through on the greens all day long. So I do think, and I think you see this a lot when we talk about like first round leaders, right? A lot of the first round leaders are coming from those morning groups because of those things. Now, for me, as far as a DFS perspective, this week, if there was an advantage that I saw, I would certainly use that to my benefit. But when we're talking about over 4 days, you're just trying to get 6 guys to the cut. So for this week, it's definitely something I'll look at. But from a DFS perspective, I'm not putting too much weight into it because you're thinking over 72 holes that things are going to come together regardless of draw if conditions aren't significant in the morning and or afternoon. But it's definitely a good process to look at, and especially anytime we're playing these seaside courses, when the elements are a factor, you do have to put it in part of your process. Now, I think one thing that people can do is overweigh these kind of things, right?
Yep.
This narrative that some guys just can't play in the wind. There's certainly guys that excel more in the wind based off ball flight apex, guys that can hit it lower. Those guys, of course, are going to have a little bit of an advantage. But we're talking about the PGA Tour. All these guys are good enough to, even in 30-mile-an-hour winds, to get this thing to 20 under par. And so I just think that sometimes we overweigh. What happens is throughout the week when we're building and we're thinking about our process, we tend to overthink when it gets to this part of the week, right? Wednesdays, we have an idea, and then somebody will post something on social media, and we'll be like, well, you start thinking of this, and all these outside factors kind of sway what you're thinking, when a lot of the times I think it's overblown. And so, in long answer short, yes, it's part of the process, but there's not a lot of weight that I put into it on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on how many lineups you're building. I'm like you, I only build 20 lineups. I really can't think of a time where I've considered it that much. That's probably burned me in the past. But like you said, I think you can really kill yourself. Just by changing your lineups throughout the week because you're overthinking that too much. And then the wind could even change, like Phil said. I mean, it could, looking at the forecast right now, like you said, looks like tomorrow's going to be rough. But I mean, even the rest of the week, it's going to be windy, and who knows? I mean, Saturday and Sunday could change quick. So I had a quick sub question for you here. What's worse to play golf in? Really high winds or playing behind a slow group in front of you?
Playing behind a slow group. Always.
Even with high winds?
Yes, always.
Okay.
Now from a maybe a PGA perspective, everything's kind of slow. But when I'm out playing golf, I would much rather play in the wind than behind a slow group.
So I think that right there speaks to our different talent level of golf here. I don't mind taking my time on my shots, really thinking them through. The wind is gonna. I mean, I'm so bad that it doesn't even really matter.
Yeah. See, listen, when you have kids and a wife and you're out there 6 hours, you're in trouble when you get home. So give me the pace of play so I'm not in the doghouse. I'll deal with a little bit of wind. And I actually enjoy playing in the wind because it allows you to kind of hit different golf shots and try to control trajectories and cuts and draws and things like that. But yeah, the slow group is the killer for me every time. No way you slice it.
So that, again, another sub question here. I don't really care. I'm just going to ask you. I think I've asked you through the DMs before. What kind of tips, or how do you change your swing up when you're playing in the wind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the first thing you do is you club up. So the one thing that I think that the number one factor where people go wrong when we talk about playing in the wind is the harder you swing, it creates more spin on the golf ball. And what that does is it gets exacerbated in the wind, right? So what you want to do is club up, and you don't want to swing hard at it. You're trying to control the spin of the golf ball, which penetrates it through the wind. If you've played where it's windy out and you hit driver swinging hard and the ball gets up and it's slicing and the wind's left to right, that ball is going to go 25 yards further right than it normally does. So that would be the first thing is club up and don't swing as hard. The other thing that I like to do is choke up on the club slightly, play the ball slightly back in the stance. And for me, when you're trying to control trajectory, you really have to make sure that you're getting your upper body, your chest through the golf shot, almost, trying to pin the ball down to the ground. That's going to, create that lower trajectory. But the number one thing is swinging too hard and putting extra spin on the golf ball. All that does is balloon it and make things worse. If you get the ball offline at all, it's just 10 times as bad as it would be before, where if you just club up and try to, keep your swing controlled, it's going to control your ball flight and your trajectory, and it's going to help you play in the wind.
Well said. Yeah, I'll consider all that. Like I said, I don't know if I can really change my game too much overnight, but I like what you said there. It seems like I probably hit it too hard to begin with. So we'll move forward. It's enough about my own game here. My second question here is, and you kind of hit on it, will another shorter player win this year? You said Brendan Todd won at minus 24 the first time it was here. And again, this is only the third year that we're having this event. Brian Gay won last year. Brian Gay's been, I think, top 5 both years, including the win last year. Both of them are short, but, pretty accurate hitters, especially Brendan Todd. This ranks as one of the shortest golf courses that we're going to see on tour as well. So do you think it's going to be another shorter player, or do you think some of those longer hitters, those good ball strikers are going to come into play, or do you think it'll just kind of be a mix this weekend?
Sort of a mix. So the one thing I take into account is the ball strikers, again, are going to prosper, your better ball strikers. And Brendan Todd and Brian Gates, apparently Brian Gates needs to buy a house in Bermuda because he shows up here every week, or every year rather. Now, hitting fairways, is it a premium, especially in this Bermuda grass that can be very sticky? The ball can drop down into the grass. The main thing when you're talking about a short course, and we're talking about controlling trajectories, is playing out of the fairway allows you to control the spin of your golf ball. So it's going to be very beneficial. The other thing it negates is the advantage for the overly long player, right? And typically on every week-to-week basis, there's a significant advantage for the bombers on tour. It's more the bomb and gouge perspective, right? They're just bombing and they're gouging. Well, this week, there's going to be a lot of holes where it negates their ability to even hit driver off of the tee. So I think it certainly lends itself to a short hitter winning. However, I wouldn't put all my marbles into the short hitter basket too either, because it's to me, I think the most important thing is going to be ball striking this week, strokes gained, ball striking. I don't want to dive into it too much this week, but I don't know if it'll be another short hitter, but I do know that it definitely negates the longer player, where they typically have an advantage in 95% of golf tournaments with their distance. I do think with the wind and being able to be in the fairway and control your golf ball is going to be at a certain advantage. And typically the shorter hitters find themselves in the short grass more often. So fairways gained is going to be certainly something to look out for this week, whether that ends up being a short hitter or an intermediate hitter. The one thing I do know and expect is for it to kind of negate the advantage that the longer hitter has.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And it does seem like accuracy is going to be pretty important this weekend. Obviously, with the wind, of course, being able to control your ball, like you said, but also with the Bermuda grass as well, just being able to find those fairways and using those wedges to set up those birdie shots. So, no, I think that's a great answer there. With this course too, there's some really short par 5s, it seems like. And the par 3s are going to be some of the tougher holes as they're all about 200 plus yards. So again, we're going to see a lot of long irons this weekend, some wedge play. And of course, with a lot of these putting contests, or with a lot of these birdie fests, we'll see a putting contest, I think. So
the par 3s are ridiculous, by the way. The par 3s are, again, you throw out the par 3s and there's just not a whole lot to it. I think there's what, 6 par 4s that are less than 400 yards. So, but the par 3s, 3 of them range from 2 to 240. And then you throw in the factor of the wind. They're difficult, and you're just trying to make par and run out of there on these par 3s. At least 3 of the 4 of them. The one on the front 9 is, I think, like 150 yards. So that one's not necessarily a huge deal, but the wind and the length of the par 3s, your par 3 efficiency is probably going to be a pretty significant factor this week. Did I lose you there, man?
Yeah, well, I agree. It seems like those par 5s are
Hunter, I think we're losing you, man. Did we lose you completely? Oh, no. We might have lost him, folks. All right. Well, we'll see if Hunter comes back. I'll just run with it from here until my man shows back up. So par 3s are certainly going to be significant this week. And the one thing from a kind of a DFS perspective that I think is extremely important this week in FanShare, not only is it extremely useful tool on a week-to-week basis, but especially this week is ownership in a very kind of uncertain field that we're heading into. I think it just gives us an extreme advantage. For example, right now, a guy like Russell Knox is projected to be at about 27%, which is high. It's just very high. And what we said on Monday on the Approach podcast is the way that I look at it, and you definitely take projected ownership certainly into the equation, but at the same time, when you're between two different players, right, and you have good feelings on both of them, and you're trying to find that determining factor on, do we go this way? Do we go this way? How are we feeling? What are we going to do with this player? Falling back on the projected ownership is certainly an advantage from the perspective that if we can get a guy that we like at 4% instead of 16%, that's given us just those many more lottery tickets into these GPPs. And so that's something that you definitely want to take into consideration when we're talking about the projected ownership. And it's certainly a useful tool, especially on weeks where there's a lot of unknowns, where there's a lot of players that you're not 100% certain of. And then just to go in until Hunter comes back here, what I like to do on a week-to-week basis is, and I'm certain that, a lot of other people are like this, whether you're building 10 lineups, 20 lineups, you're doing the 150 max, whatever it may be, you go through your process, you create your player pool. And I think this is a wonderful week to really step back and instead of focusing on all the strokes gained data that we do on a week-to-week basis, which is certainly beneficial from every standpoint. But let's be honest, everybody has access to these strokes gained information. So we can't go into a week just on strokes gained information. And I think this week, especially where there's not a ton of strokes gained information on a lot of the guys. I mean, we have a lot of KFC guys this week, some older guys, and then you throw in the elements. So this is a good week to kind of go through your process and what your strategy is, to have the game theory thought, try to find some value in thinking differently than a lot of other people. And that's where the projections will help you. The projections kind of give you an idea of how people are thinking heading into the specific week. And so just that in itself is going to help your process. And that's something you can carry on from week to week to week. Which I think is extremely important. But when we talk about how we're building these lineups, you like to make the player pool and then you kind of work off of that, right? So the problem is if you're just picking random people, right? You instead of having a certain core group of guys that you're wanting to build off of, if you're just kind of picking random people, trying to have different lineups in every lineup, then you're starting to just break away from all process altogether. And now you're just literally throwing darts at a board, right? You have to have some reasoning, some strategy, and some thought behind why you're selecting each of these players. And so I think it helps to have the list of guys that you've come to a conclusion. These are the guys that you're most comfortable with. And again, we said it earlier, just because a guy you pick has a bad week, that doesn't mean the process wasn't there. And that doesn't mean to jump off of a guy, because we see it all the time where some guys have a bad week and people are immediately off of them, right? And so, you can't jump ship that quickly when it comes to this. And so that's kind of what I'll say about that. You kind of want to just make sure that you have a process. You're not just randomly throwing darts, and whatnot. So think it through, build the player pool. It's going to help it not just because what happens is, especially when you're doing 20, 25, 30 lineups, whatever it may be, if you're just clicking buttons, there's no strategy to that. You're not going to consistently be profitable from a DFS perspective with that kind of strategy. And again, that's why the game theory, which my guy Rob, to plug him, he does a fantastic article every week for FanShare, and so start thinking through things. Try to think of what this person's doing, why are they doing it, and how can we gain value by trying to doing something different for that perspective. So let me check in on Hunter. Let me see if he said something. Let's see if he's going to make it back. But yeah, so for me, it's just that would be kind of my process. If in weeks like this, again, don't get sold and so focused on strokes gain data, because even me, I have a tendency to do that. There's multiple factors, right? You watch golf. You can see how guys are trending. You can kind of feel things out. The golf course. You can kind of feel out and think of what guys are going to play well there. The strokes gain data itself is very beneficial, but I use it as a crutch sometimes. So it's been difficult for me to try to step back. And I think this week's very refreshing for me to be able to kind of step back and think from a whole perspective on my strategy and how I'm going about things, than just saying, hey, this guy's trending one way, I'm playing this guy because the stats tell me to play this guy. Let's be honest, guys. The strokes gain stuff, great. It's very beneficial, but it's never worked out chalk, right? It's never been that it's always the guys that are trending in strokes gain that we have to play. And so then let me just hit on the top of the board for this week, just so we can talk about a few of the guys. So from a DFS perspective, let me pull this up. So from a DFS perspective, our top guy is Matthew Fitzpatrick, okay? And so Matthew Fitzpatrick, the one benefit Matthew Fitzpatrick has is he won the last time he played at Valderrama, which is a very difficult golf course. So we're definitely headed into different conditions this week. When we look at from a ownership perspective for Matthew Fitzpatrick, he's up there at 25%. He's projected to be the second highest owned guy. He has win equity. However, I'm not sure that he's going to be a guy I'm not going to be playing. I'm sure I'm not going to be playing him this week. I know the form was there, but for him to come in this week as the highest valued salary guy, and he's at 25%, instead of laying that 11,000 down, it gives me the opportunity to kind of build and put in some extra guys in that 9 to 8K range that I may be feeling a little bit more comfortable. And we just look at the 10,500 guys. So just to rate them here, everybody over 10,000, Bazutenhout right now is at 20. He seems to be a really good course fit here. He's going to be in a lot of lineups. The one guy that's kind of surprising to me is Patrick Reed. And I get that he's the kind of the name this week, right? His form's not been very good. Now, Patrick Reed tends to play well on more difficult golf courses, but the form for me is not there. If he was sub 15%, I think there's some value there. But I would be hesitant on playing Patrick Reed for those reasons. And Mito's the guy that all of us on fan, on DFS golf and betting golf on social media. He's the guy. I'm actually okay with playing Mito now. So earlier in the week, I actually thought his ownership could be somewhere up by 25%. I'm okay if you want to play him in some lineups, but again, he's definitely going to be pretty chalk there. And then it rounds it out with Seamus Power, who is the most comfortable guy for me. Models out well. Great ball striker. We talked about being able to kind of strike the golf ball around this place and how that's a benefit. And he comes in, just south of 15%. So out of those guys, I think Seamus Power would be the guy that I'm most trying to kind of throw my chips in. And so that's going to kind of round it out there. I don't know if Hunter's going to be back with us, so I'm just going to roll through a few more guys that I kind of like going into this week. And so we'll take a look at – so let's talk about Denny McCarthy, for example. And this is a guy where I think everybody kind of sees what we see, right? He's the best putter in the field. And he had a top 5 here last year. I think he finished T4. And so he's another guy that you can certainly look at. But again, I'm somewhat concerned with the 15% ownership. Not enough to not play him. He's going to be in a lot of my lineups. Hunter, can you hear me, man? You back? We'll let Hunter get everything back in control. You're good, man. It happens all the time. It's not a problem. I'm glad that you can make it back.
And storming all day here.
No problem.
I appreciate it, man. I'm sorry if it cuts out again.
You're fine. You're fine. I was just kind of running through a couple players that I potentially like. And then hitting on another guy is Ryan Armour, right? So Ryan Armour has fantastic course history around here. Not top 10 2 years in a row. A guy that's game really fits this golf course, and he's sitting there right now at 10%. So we're okay with that 10%. He missed the cut at the Sanderson Farms. One of the other things that's really interesting about the past 2 winners of this event is, I believe, Brian Gay missed 3 cuts coming in when he won, and Brendan Todd missed 4 cuts coming in when he won. So again, it's not necessarily a guy that's going to be in great form, and that's why I think you can kind of look away from the strokes gained in the last 5, the last 12, the last 24, and kind of just build a different way than we normally would, because form clearly hasn't been the end-all, be-all coming into this event. You back?
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I am.
Welcome back, man.
Like I said, dude, you are a legend for that.
No problem. I was like, you just froze, and I was like, is he there? I'm glad that you got back in, man.
I thought it was doomed for sure, but no, thanks. You said, like you said, Brian Gay. What did he? I think I have him down. He missed like his previous 11 cuts, I think, and hadn't won a tournament since 2013. I wrote down until he won last year here at the Bermuda. That's another one of those things that's so frustrating, I think, about this game, but it's also something that you can. If you can find a way to sprinkle in some of these low-owned darts, you don't have to center your entire lineup around Brian Gay type golfers every single week. But if you can sprinkle a few in every now and then, you might have a week that, ends up, taking it to the top. So did you hit on any specific range or just kind of hit on a couple of guys that you like?
You know what, because I wasn't sure if you were coming through. I actually did go through the 10K range and just kind of broke it down. I did see that you had Patrick Reed as a guy that you're potentially going to play. And I said, I don't know if I'm there yet. What's the reasoning behind the Patrick Reed play?
More of a leverage thing. When I was looking at this tournament, I really wanted to kind of take a chance with some ownership plays. I've been on Mito forever. I mean, who hasn't been? I'm not staking my flag in anything here, but normally I would just go ahead and insert him in most of my lineups, but I don't think he's going to be the top of the top plays this week, especially at the ownership that he's coming in. Obviously, he ranks well in every model, but back to Patrick Reed, my thought process on him is if there's ever a tournament that he's going to play well at, a course that he's going to play well at. It's going to be, a shorter course where you got to, use that short game a little bit. I haven't looked at his ball striking, numbers off the tee recently. I mean, he just hasn't played recently. But again, if there's ever a time where he's going to come back and, I mean, he's way better than everybody in this field from a long-term perspective.
Yeah.
He got sick a few months ago. He didn't play well at the FedEx, the championship there. His form is not the greatest. I have him as a GPP play because he is a riskier play, but he's half the ownership at some of those other guys like Mito and Fitzpatrick, Bez or Bez. That's like what I like to call him. Yeah. It's more of an ownership play for me. And like I said, if there's ever a course that he's going to play well at, I don't know how he does on windy courses, I guess, but it's got to be a shorter course. And like I said, he's just way above every other, player here from a long-term perspective. So the more that the week's gone on and, that I've thought about it and looked at his ownership number, I do think I will have some Patrick Reed on my lineups. I do know you like Seamus Power quite a bit this week. Am I right on that?
Yeah. And I was talking a little bit about Seamus. For him to be, I thought we were talking Monday, and I thought that there was a chance that Patrick Reed would be the lowest owned out of this group. And right now it's supposed to be Seamus Power. And I like Patrick Reed for a lot of the reasons you said. He's just shy of 20% at this point. Him and Mito are kind of right there together. And that just shows you kind of where the Mito train's taken off to, right? The fact that, and kind of the form of Patrick Reed. But he certainly he's a guy that Patrick Reed hits a low ball, and he can certainly get around this park without an issue. I do like Seamus Power. You want to talk about a fantastic ball striker. That's what Seamus Power is. And again, I don't want to kill everybody with strokes gain, information here, but in the last 24, he's second in strokes gain total, 11 strokes gained putting, 5th strokes gained tee to green, and 6 strokes gained in short game. So he's kind of doing everything right, and he fits the mold really well this week. And if he's going to be the lowest of those 10K guys, he's definitely going to be a play for me.
Yep, I like that a lot. You hit on everything I was going to say about him, so well done. Anyone else in the 10K range that you want to talk about? I know you kind of went through it a little bit.
Yeah, my thoughts about Fitzpatrick is I just can't get around the 11,000 mark, right? He's coming in the highest, the highest valued player as far as salary purposes. I know he has a win at Valderrama the last time out. Very difficult golf course. He has some win equity, but at 26% and 11,000, I just think there's a lot of value to saving a little bit of money up top and being able to kind of sprinkle in some guys in the 9 to 8K range that you can. I just can't get behind a 25, 26%, $11,000 Matt Fitzpatrick. I just can't do it. Even coming off a win, his form hasn't been great really all year until recent when he got the win. So I'm going to stay away from that. And Bezuidenhout, I think he's a perfect course fit at 20%. I could play him potentially in some lineups. But again, man, it's tough with these ownership projections at these salaries at this level of player. That somewhat scares me off a little bit. And so, I think Seamus is going to be the main play for me at 10,200 on DraftKings. I may not play another guy from the 10K range, honestly. I mean, I could try to talk myself into Mito, but I don't know if I'm going to do it. So Seamus Power probably is the only guy that I'm going to touch at that 10K range.
Yeah, I agree. He's got decent form. I mean, he played so well over the summer. He's got decent form too. He's ranking really well in approach over his last 4 rounds, in this field, which is relatively weak, of course. But I'm with you on Seamus Power. I didn't know his ownership was going to be lower than Reed's. I guess I haven't looked in a bit, but no, I'm all on Power then. The 9K range, you're going to see a bunch of guys there that probably won't see in the 9K range for a long time, depending on the tournament, of course. But is there anyone that catches your eye here? I do kind of like Pendrith quite a bit.
Yeah, that was going to be my what I was going to mention. I can get behind Pendrith again. He's first in the field off the tee, right? So he's hitting on one of those keys that we referenced earlier. He's also at the bottom of the 9K range at 9,100. A guy who I honestly can't stand, was Danny Willett. I hate playing Danny Willett, but ball striking wise, he's been decent. His approach game's been better as of late. He's got a solid short game, and I think his ownership. If you let me pull it real quick,
Yep, go ahead.
I don't think it's gonna be. There it is. He's under 10%, so he's at 9% right now. So Pendrith's also at the same percentage. If and this is what I was talking about, why ownership's super important earlier. Because if we're between those two guys, I like Pendrith better. Now, if Willett was somewhere down in the 6 range, then you could probably try to make an argument for them. But if you're trying to determine between two guys that you both kind of like, one way of helping it out, especially this week, is to look at those ownership projections. So I will Pendrith would be the guy in the 9K range for me as well.
Yep, I'm with you. I'm really not a fan of a lot of the 9K range. I'd probably say, like I said, Pendrith. He strikes the ball so well. You said it at the top of the show. We're looking for those ball strikers this week. Again, not going too crazy with, shots gained numbers, but I love ball strikers this week, as every week in these birdie fests. And he's just kind of a consistent player. He's played a lot on the Korn Ferry Tour. He's got kind of a safe floor, I think. He might not go out there and win it, which kind of sucks for his salary, but I wouldn't mind starting a lot of my lineups with Power and Pendrith, because you still have a decent amount of salary to work with in that 7K range. And we'll go down there eventually here, but anyone else in the 9K range, I think Hadwin seems to be pretty chalky. You going to have any Hadwin in your lineups?
Hadwin, if we were looking at this from a outright betting standpoint, I think Adam Hadwin is a reasonable guy to have in a lineup. Yeah, you know what? I actually will probably sprinkle in some Adam Hadwin. His ownership's not terrible. When I'm looking at right, well, damn, I don't know. 20% is a lot to bite off for Adam Hadwin. But again, a lot of the signs that you're seeing, there's reasonings behind people wanting to play Adam Hadwin. It's just, are you there with Adam Hadwin? Now that I look at it, he is the 3rd highest projected owned player in the entire field. So, yeah, 3rd at almost 21%. So for me, wow, I'm probably staying away from Adam Hadwin. But from a outright betting standpoint or a placing standpoint, then I certainly think he should be on a lot of cards.
Yeah, and that's one way that you can kind of, I don't want to say like hedge, but if you're not going to have any Mito in your card or on your lineups this week, why not put an outright down on Mito and a decent number, I think, still before he wins the tournament eventually here. But,
yeah, and I think that's a great. I mean, Mito has. I mean, if you threw away his putting, he's just been so good. It's just the problem. He putts like a child. Yeah. And so it's hard to go with that. But yeah, from an outright perspective, I can get behind it. I'm not going to have any Mito in DFS. I know that's probably going to make a lot of people upset, but I will stay away.
Yeah, and I've got Mito in my favorite plays on my cheat sheet, and I mean, how are you not going to have Mito as a favorite play?
Yeah, no doubt.
Top in everything. So I don't know. It's like you said, he doesn't putt very well, and if it gets a little windy here, and I don't really know what his course record is on windy courses. As a lot of these guys, this is one of the first times we're really seeing them on in windy courses on the PGA Tour at least. So
yep.
Yeah, I'm not going to be too heavy on Mito this week. I probably won't have a whole lot. Again, I'm not going to take him out of my plays though, because he could easily win this tournament, and if he does that, then I'll be sad because I played him almost every week until
it's almost like the fear of missing out with Mito, right? Because he's kind of become like a social media like child to everybody, right? And so when he wins, we all want to be on it. Like we all want to be together to be able to celebrate it. I will probably not be. I feel like I've not been as Mito heavy as a lot of people. And maybe that's because I'm a dumbass, but I just haven't at this point. But it's coming eventually. But again, for me this week, if you want to play from outright perspective, go for it. But DFS, and again, I could burn me, which a lot of this stuff does. We're trying to talk through things, but I'm going to be off of him.
Yeah, it's kind of giving me Zalatoris vibes from last fall, where he started playing so well, and like you said, he's kind of DFS darling for all of us because we want him to go out there and win. And he kind of started having high ownership. We saw Zalatoris in the 10 to 9K or 9 to 10K range. And don't get me wrong, he's still a great play, but I would have totally bet that he would have won a tournament by now. If he would have asked me back in the spring. So we'll see.
He killed it. Zalatoris hurt a lot of lineups at the Zozo for sure too, because he just wasn't good. Yeah, for sure, man.
That was tough. Moving down to the 8K range here, and we got about 10 minutes left, so we'll kind of highlight on a few of these plays from each salary range. I like Denny quite a bit this week. I don't know if that's a popular play or not. He's fourth in strokes gained putting on Bermuda grass in this field. If the majority of the field is hitting the greens, it could just kind of come down to whoever has the hot putter. And we've seen Denny play well before, especially at this tournament. He has top 15 finishes here, including a fourth last year at in the 2021. He ranks second in driving accuracy and 12th in greens in regulation, again, in this relatively weak field. But I do like Denny quite a bit this week. I don't know where, again, ownership numbers this week I could see them being way different than, obviously we got a good guess, of course, but I couldn't believe Sung Kang's ownership last week. Like, we could see some of these guys at the top or some of the most, talked about players on these kind of shows really soak up a lot of it. So I'm not too sure on Denny. Do you like Denny this week, I guess?
I do like Denny. Like, to your point, he's one of, if not the best putter in the entire field. He's right around 14% owned. He's one of the higher chalk guys that's going to be in my lineup. I'm very comfortable with him. I also, just to kind of give one guy out of the 8K range that I like the Gala, but I'll give you somebody at the bottom, which is Ryan Armour. Top 10 the last 2 times playing here. He struggles around the greens, but again, I think that's going to be somewhat negated based off a small golf course, hitting lots of wedges into greens. I'm not sure how much scrambling we're going to see this week. With relatively big putting surfaces, Ryan Armour is a guy who's played well here. Of course, he's got fantastic course history. So he'll be the guy that I kind of like to play there, right at the bottom of that 8 range. It gives you a lot of value to kind of build around.
I like that. He does seem to be gaining some ownership, like you said. A lot of these guys that played well the last 2 years here, we normally see that anyways, but they're starting to get quite a bit of the ownership. I think he's a very safe play, especially in cash. I think he'd probably be a lock for me. It just seems like one of those courses for him. I love the Thigala play. He's been gaining strokes off the tee in all of his PGA starts so far this year. He had that top 10 at the Sanderson Farms. He's just another one of those guys that hits the ball well, and I think we'll see him on tour for years to come. Couple other guys, I don't mind Scott Stallings. He's got good course history here as well. He kind of plays well on those short coastal courses. That's about it. There's some Korn Ferry Tour guys like Stefan Jaeger, Bromlett, Lipsky. Do you like any of those guys? We also have Guido in here. He's kind of a chalky option every week, especially on the Euro Tour. I threw a lot of names at you there. Do you like any of those guys?
Yeah, Steven Jaeger has been kind of a guy that I've been, I don't say out in front of, but I've played a lot. And for good reasons. He models out well. He's played well. Joseph Brandlett is another guy that I like. However, it hasn't been, from what I can remember. Yeah, last 5 things have kind of gone away from him. He lost 4.5 strokes on the green at Shriners. The putting hasn't been there. You throw that on top of over 3 strokes lost on approach. So it kind of tells me maybe his ball striking's not there right now. So I'm probably not going to be on Bramlett. Guido, though, you mentioned, who is a guy that models out great for everybody because he just does everything pretty well. Win equity's not there, of course, but I could see him being a fantastic play. And to your point, he's going to be kind of chalk at 13%. But I'm okay with eating 13% of Guido. At this point, I could see that probably going up by tomorrow. But between those guys, I would play Steven Jaeger and Guido. And again, Scott Stallings is interesting to me. I don't know if he's going to be in my lineups. The 8K range is definitely interesting. I just think that I like so much of the 7K range that I don't know how much 8K I'll play with, but there's going to be 2 or 3 guys that I'll definitely have in there, and Jaeger, Denny McCarthy, Ryan Armour, and potentially Guido will be in there.
Yeah, and got a quick question for you. We talk all the time about, finding low owned guys to differentiate your lineups. Do you ever consider like the overall build of your lineup when like trying to be different? Like, for example, you could load your whole lineup with 8K guys this week, and I think that's going to be relatively contrarian because a lot of guys are going to be trying to fit in at least, one 10K, or above player. So that's one way I try to get a little contrarian, especially when I'm choosing a few chalky guys. Do you consider that much when making lineups?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do think the projected ownership tells us how people are thinking. You know what I mean? So that's how you gain value, is if you can kind of dive into the mind of what people are thinking and try to be contrarian, be opposite of what that is. If there's guys that you like. So, hey, listen, I'm all about, if there's, it sounds like I'm like anti-chalk, right? But I'm not. Like, if there's chalk guy that you love, a chalk guy or two, roll with it. And then we step back, and then we can start looking at guys that we like that are low owned. That's where we get the value. That's where we contrarian from other lineups. So there's nothing there. There's sometimes there's bad chalk, but sometimes there's good chalk. Is Russell Knox at damn near 30% good chalk? Maybe it is. I don't know. We'll find out. But that's a lot for me. But yeah, to your point, I definitely think there's value in finding the guys that up top you might like and saying, hey, I'm not worried that everybody likes him, because sometimes there's a reason everybody likes him, right?
Yeah.
It's because they're set up to have a good week and they go out and do that. But then if that's the way you want to go, then you can't just start going and throwing 15% chalk guys in with your top chalk, because then you're building similar lineups to what everybody else is doing. When you're trying to win a GPP or cash one of these big ones, you have to be different in areas. And so that's where, if you want to go chalk up top, that's fine, but think and step back, and how are you going to build out that lineup from that point? So I think that's a great point for sure.
Yeah, no, well said. I could talk like the DFS strategy with you for hours and hours, but we got to get out of here shortly in a few minutes. Give me your Cliff Notes version of the 7K and 6K range. Give me a few guys that you like and maybe throw a few stats out at me.
Yeah, so I'll give you my 2 favorite plays. My first one's Nick Watney. He's arisen from the dead, the Undertaker meme, right? He literally, if you break down his stats, if you go last 50, right? Just real quick, I know we're running out of time. So if we go last 50, he's terrible in everything. I mean, it's just not good. But when we go last 24, everything's good. He's gained 3.4 strokes total over the last 5 starts. He had a second at Sanderson. He's 9th in strokes gained total, 9th in strokes gained putting. Bermuda's his best surface. I love Nick Watney. He's definitely a guy that I'm going to be playing a lot of. And then the other Nick I like is Nick Hardy. And Nick Hardy does a lot of things I like. And when I'm just looking at his stats, he's trending fantastically. I know it's not the end of the world if he is, but he's made 5 straight cuts. And he basically just got on tour, right? This is a guy that came off of the Korn Ferry Tour. He's had success. His last start, he gained almost 6 strokes total. He's gaining an approach. I mean, the everything's there for Nick Hardy. And also, I look at ownership wise. You have, where's Hardy at? I think he was. I'm sorry, I lost him here. Anyway, those 2 are the ones that stand out to me for sure. Nick Watney probably being my favorite play this week, because I saw his ownership. Nick Watney's ownership's less than 5%. And I think that it's telling us to play Nick Watney and what his game has been. It's trending well. I know it doesn't necessarily matter if the game's trending well heading into this week. But then I'll just hit you with one 6K guy real quick, and that's Adam Svensson. A lot tells you to play him, right? When you're going and looking at 6K guys, we always have this tendency to we're looking at 6K guys, looking for the guy that just has all these great strokes gain stats and whatnot. Well, there's a reason they're a 6K guy in a crap field, right? We're not going to find that. So we have to find what we think meshes with the golf course. And I think Adam Svensson does that very well. And you could even throw in Brian Stewart and Harry Hall is another guy I like. So I'm going to be very heavy in that 7K range, but quickly those are some guys. And then Matthew Neesmith as well. Ball striking Jesse, guy can just flat out hit it. And again, right now sitting at 7% at 7,300. These are beautiful lineup build plays, right? And so I'm very heavy in that 7K range. And then if you want to do that, then go back up and grab Mito, grab Patrick Reed, then you build it off of like that. But those are some plays and some guys that I'd be looking at.
Love it. Like I said, I love power this week. I do like Pendrith. You put those two in your line, it gives you about like 7. I can't remember, kind of mid 7K left. So I'll be all over in the 7K range too. I do like Hardy a lot this week. He's been playing well on tour. I mean, he was a great, Korn Ferry Tour player, but he's been playing well, even in his PGA starts too. So love that call. I do love Harry Hall quite a bit too. I just don't know what it is with him, but he's been playing well recently. He had a good stretch at the end of the Korn Ferry Tour, as well as he was good at, I think it was Sanderson Farms.
And this is to get that's the reason why the fall swing is. A lot of people find it difficult, but this is where you get values on guys, because there's a reason ownership's high on guys that people are aware of. People don't know about KFT guys that much. Yeah. And we know that these guys are ready to win right when they get off tour. So you have to take that into perspective. And so I think if you dig into it and there's some KFT guys you like at low ownership, that's kind of the way to go.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. I think we kind of agree on some of our plays here this week. So I think that makes me feel good going into it. So, Drew, thanks for coming on. Like I said, you are a legend for taking over there for that 10 minutes.
Oh, no problem, man. I appreciate you having me on.
I was going. So, like I said, I'm a big fan of the Approach Pod. You can find him on Twitter at DetroitDave7 there. Do you have anything else to plug or anything else to say here before we sign off?
No, man. Thanks again for having me on. Good luck to everybody, and let's have a profitable week.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Thanks again for coming on, man. And I'm so used to being a guest. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming on again, and good luck this week, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.